All right, let's talk about reparations, because California is leading the charge on reparations, and this story is absolutely jaw-dropping. You have a lot of like Europeans chime in on the story. A lot of European newspapers, they're like, what is going on in California with this story?
Yeah, and how far do reparations have to reach across the globe? It's worth remembering that the West was not the only participant in the slave trade, that just as many, if not more, slaves went east to Arabic-speaking countries and were castrated so that they could not have subsequent generations. So there is no next generation of Africans to have any reparations to. So, this kind of context matters. That's just your little history lesson for the day.
It's not just the United States. Didn't Portugal basically invent the slave trade?
They they made it as a business.
An
Absolutely
industry.
right. They did not invent slavery. They invented the slave trade as a commodity. Absolutely, they did. Now, California is moving forward with a plan to offer $1.2 million in reparations to each Black resident of the state. Maybe that's one way that California wants to get residents to move back because of the mass exodus that seems to continue since the pandemic. Activists, though, are saying that this is not enough, and that their appraised value as a human descendant is $200 million per person. Here is one man, a reverend, making that argument at a state committee meeting this weekend.
You failed this. This is the second time you tried to shut me down with my number in the hand, and it won't happen. You know that the number should be equivalent to what an acre was back then. When we were given 40, okay? When we were given 40 acres, you know what that number is. You keep trying to talk about now, yet you research back to slavery, and you say nothing about slavery. Nothing. So the equivocal number from the 1860s for 40 acres today is $200 million for each and every African American. You're not supposed to be afraid. You're not supposed to be afraid. You're just supposed to tell the truth. You're not supposed to be the gatekeepers. You're supposed to say what the people want and hear from the people. So on June 17th, this will not be handed out here. It'll be handed out outside.
All right, we can stop because he's going to now talk about his barbecue that's coming up on Juneteenth.
So do we have any, can I provide some context on the 40 acres and a mule? Or do you have that?
Go ahead. No, you go.
So this was, of course, still during the Civil War in 1865 when General Tecumseh Sherman at the time said to some freed families, we need to provide 40 acres and a mule for those freed families, to allot land to some of those freed families to kind of no larger than 40 acres. That was the plan at the time to kind of get them on their feet and basically get started. That was the proposal.
Yeah. Now, families is a key word there because it wasn't 40 acres per person. Mm-hmm. He's arguing that each person should be paid the equivalent of 40 acres, not each family. But by that argument, you should find a family and split up the $200 million, if that is the value.
And it was also the land that they worked at the time. So while they were slaves on a plantation, that plantation would be divided up and given as part of this, as part of the 40 acres and a mule.
Okay, so it's not necessarily
just
like
random
sweet
acres.
California, beachfront property.
It's not like, Santa Barbara. It was like where you worked as a slave, you should be able to lay claim to that land now post-war is the idea.
Okay. And then what do you think is the present day value of a mule? I would argue a mule is a pretty good performing asset, better than even some land these days, given that the rate at which government is seizing land.
Right. Well, someone is in the chat here, super chat from Richard Smith says California wasn't even a state when slavery was around.
They actually report on this, and we're going to talk about like what is California's major sin, and it's mostly structural, and it has to do with the gold rush. That's a great point, because you wouldn't think that it would start in California. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was just
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, again, these are just proposals, and the final report will be sent to lawmakers on July 1st. California launched this reparations board to promise monetary payments to Black residents in the wake of the George Floyd death. They have not said how much it will cost, but some economists say that it will be about $800 billion to the state, which is twice the state's yearly budget. $800 billion per year. Now, here's how that breaks down. It includes $2,352 per person per year for over-policing and mass incarcerations of Black communities. So it's not even necessarily to do with slavery. Actually, almost none of it has to do with slavery, what they're paying for. Yet this man who lettered in track, because he's wearing his Letterman jacket, I don't know if it's track. He clearly lettered.
Might have been a 49ers
in something.
jacket.
It was not a 49ers jacket. It was a high school Letterman's jacket.
Oh, okay.
And so he's bringing up slave promises when this money here listed is not even to do with slavery. It's due to over-policing and mass incarceration of Black communities, $3,366 per person per year of residence between 1933 and 1977 for discriminatory lending and zoning, which also affected Hispanics and Asian people too, but sure. And $13,619 per person per year of residence in California for injustices and discrimination in health, and $77,000 per person for Black-owned business losses and devaluations included in that figure. That means a lifelong Black California resident aged at least 71 could receive more than $1.2 million in compensation. Now, I have a lot of questions about these specific things that you're paying specific groups of, especially because I am a Californian. My mom is half Spanish and half Hawaiian. So, she was raised in an ethnic population, poor. My grandmother, who is Spanish, was a prune picker in Hayward, California. She left school in the 3rd grade in order to work the fields. Maybe this community was not a victim of over-policing and mass incarceration, but for sure, zoning, injustices and discrimination in health. A lot of these things happened to my family as well. Is it my family now that should pay for something that we did not perpetuate and also were victims of? I'm confused about that. And who qualifies then as a Black resident? Can you move there now? Because again, it does not have very much to do with slavery at all. Here's how they decide who qualifies. It's determined that any descendant of an enslaved African American or of a free Black person living in the United States prior to the end of the 19th century should be entitled to reparations. If legislation is passed for the payments, the committee suggested that a state agency be created to process these claims and make payments with elderly Black residents being the priority. And this would be about 1.8 million people in California identifying as Black or African American. Now, again, this relevant question we had from this super chat, why, when California was not a slave-owning state, and it says that the preliminary report published last year highlighted how enslaved Black people were sent to California during the gold rush era. And then in the 1950s and 60s, racially restrictive covenants and redlining segregated them in many of California's largest cities. Again, I ask you, that happened to Asians that worked in the gold mines as well. That happened to Hispanics. There are a lot of minority groups in California.
The Asians who built the Transcontinental Railroad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We should also point out that the 40 acres and a mule thing, which he was stating as if that actually happened, it didn't actually happen. Like the order, it was a field order by a general, and then Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. It would never actually went into effect. It wasn't like then suddenly thousands upon thousands of slaves had land and 40 acres and a mule, and it was like a big... No, it was rescinded. It would never actually happened. So it was the idea of it.
Right.
Just to be clear about that for that guy.
Now, I think I've made this point before that, let's say that this wealth is then dumped on this population only in California. My point that I've made before from a great book that I highly recommend called Entrusted is that most generational wealth just does not pass down. This is a problem that either because of wealthy parents don't, teach financial education, or neither do schools. While there slavery by the West did hold several groups back from obtaining wealth. Groups that have wealth don't keep it for more than 1 to 2 generations. So will this actually help to raise anybody's children's standard of life? I don't know. There is no proof of that. There's no proof that, you need to prove that wealth passes down, and it just doesn't. Even the Vanderbilts were poor within 2 generations at their peak. Now, my other lingering concerns are like this one I've brought up before when we spoke about the Dutch slave trade. Whose is it to forgive? Is it mine to forgive the pain of my ancestors any more than it is mine to pay for the sins of my ancestors? You can't have it both ways. Is it something that will repair a pain in you because of generations past? Is that yours to say, like, I cashed the check, it's all good now? Does that make it all good? Does this tell people who were not slaves that they are victims in a harmful way? And does it hold them back in their lives? This is the point that Candace Owen makes in her book, that the Democratic Party has been doing this for decades and tricking Black people into thinking that their party is on their side while promoting policies that do not help them at all, and keeping them in a victim mentality so that they can't just burst past it and say, I'm going to take responsibility for my life, and I'm not going to listen to politicians making me promises anymore and bringing up past pain. And again, will this hurt state programs that are already hurting? So then, okay, Black grandparents get all of this money while their Black children are stuck in shittier education because the state now has used all of its money.
Right. So this number, the 1.2 million that passed the board, right? The numbers are, it would cost the state $800 billion, right? 1.2 million per person. That's what passed.
Yeah.
Right? That would cost $800 billion. The state has $300 billion. So it would bankrupt the state immediately on the 1.2 million. That guy wants $200 million per person. Do the math on that. Think how there's going to be nothing left of California.
Right. And so, again, you might raise up one population and then just leave these, poor Hispanic and Black kids, in worse off. Teachers, police, don't get me started about defunding the police. And then another question, who would pay? Would California reach into the pockets of taxpayers who maybe have left the state? For instance, me, because my dad's Italian, that makes me white. Would that then say, well, hey, you grew up in this system, you benefited from these laws, let's reach back. Like, this is not something that I would put past California, even though I left in 2008.
I'm just laughing. So many people in the chat, they're like, yeah, someone just said, I identify as a Black trans Californian, and I'm going to move there.
There you go.
There you go.
But I do think that this is, what Michael Schellenberger calls solving racism with racism. I'm not sure, who this is really going to help. I feel like, if you're somebody who is an elderly Black person, you might want to say, I appreciate this, but let's make sure it doesn't hurt my grandkids, right?
Right.
Let's make sure that they actually then still have a state to grow up in that they
maybe,
can
but
succeed
let's
in.
be clear. I know that I hear your voice in my head, and I'm pretending I'm you now, which is, let's not speak for other people.
Yeah, sure.
So let's not pretend to be an old Black woman or an old Black man, right?
Okay, that's fair enough.
And
I don't like how that came out either. So, okay.
Yeah, and maybe they'll say, no, give me the money. I want all the money, and I don't give a shit what happens to California or my grandkids.
Well, let's not say that either, right?
Maybe they'll say that. Or maybe they'll say, you know what? No, I don't want the money because it makes no sense. It was 150 years ago. It has nothing to do with me, and it has not, who knows what they will say. But anyway, if you're an old Black man, you tell us what you think about it. If you're an old Black woman, let us know what you think about it. Well, yeah, I mean, we're just trying to come at it from, well, anyway, present the facts. Here's what's happening. Here's the money. Here's the numbers. This idea of 40 acres and a mule, I saw someone saying it actually did happen. No, it didn't happen. It was rescinded. It was a promise that was totally never kept by the United States when Andrew Johnson took over after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. So it never happened. And it was never the big program. All the 500,000 acres was returned to former Confederate owners of the property, so it didn't happen.
You want to know what the Mongols did with slaves? Is that they would conquer a village. They'd take the prettiest women and send them back to the village to now be wives of all of the powerful
Mongols,
people. They take the artisans. So like, ooh, can you make nice shoes? Can you make nice bags or bread? They too would be sent back to the village. And then everybody else would be used on the front line to go attack the next village, and you'd be killed on the front line in war. That's how you became a slave. So
Mongols.
Yeah, you know, we can all be glad that that's not our fate. That's not better.
Yeah. And would they have to pay taxes on all this money? So you get $200 million. Do you then pay taxes, or it's just like free money?
Yes, clearly you would pay taxes on that.
So then it's just a money flow. It's like money laundering back into, and back into all these corrupt politicians.
In one of the highest taxed states in the country. Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.